Now let me welcome and introduce our next panelist, Mr. Thomas Bloink. Thomas is the head of Section Accounting and Auditing Law at the Federal Ministry of Justice of Germany and represents Germany in this regard on a national, European, and international level. After a career as a lawyer with an international law firm, he has been working in the ministry in different positions in Berlin and Brussels. He is currently member of the IOSCO Committee 1 and of the Accounting and Auditing Regulatory Committee at the EU level. Over to you, Thomas.
Thanks. Well, thank you, James, for the kind words of introduction, and good morning to everybody, ladies and gentlemen. I'm not that professional as Arnold is to go on the stage, so I keep here. I hold myself here on the right side, but I try to be as professional as Arnold did. Arnold has already very well outlined, I think, the general framework for the environment to increase audit quality. And for myself, I want to focus on one of the key issues which has been mentioned in the framework itself, and that is the role of audit committees of the audited entities. Just a remark for the beginning, these are personal remarks and do not represent the statement of the Ministry of Justice. Now, audit committees are set in very different national corporate law regimes. So it would be very difficult for me to highlight and describe all the settings of audit committees in different national jurisdictions. I would like to focus on the audit reform in Europe. I've been negotiating this reform on an EU level, so I know a little bit more of the details, probably, of the outcome and the reasons behind it. So I will try to outline the new framework which is set on the European level. Now, one of the key issues, not the only one, but one of the key issues of the EU audit reform was to increase audit quality. Most of us, I think, are up to date with the key issues which have been discussed, and I mention them here because we come back to them later on with regard to the role of the audit committees. I just mentioned the additional limitations on the provision of non-audit services by the statutory auditor, the question of external rotation, the new requirements for ensuring the independence of the statutory auditor of a PIE, and the increase in communication of audit reports and audit results to the general public. Now, member states at the moment in the European Union are about to implement these new reforms, and we already see some changes in the arena, also on the audit firms, but also with regard to the audited entities. Now, I would like to concentrate on the role of the audited entity itself in this framework of increasing audit quality, and that is basically the increased role of the audit committees. This, I think, not only increases the possibility of audit committees to challenge management during the financial reporting process, but it also will increase the pressure on the auditor itself. So let me start with a short, high-level description of how the auditor will to communicate his working results under the reform. There are basically three instruments. The first one is a very well-known, is the audit report. The EU reform will lead to more information to the general public. One of the key issues is the famous Key Audit Matters chapter, and that's what Arnold already mentioned. I think that is a very important issue, and that will change the whole setting of the audit report, especially for PIEs, and probably also for others. Now, the second instrument, and that is, I think, for audit committees is one of the crucial ones, is the new additional report. We in Germany, we know the so-called long-form report, which is an instrument to give more details, more information from the auditor to the audit committees. Now, this report, I think, will be crucial for the European Union to give more information about risks, for example, for the going concern assumption, and more detailed information on the measurement methods of the auditor. So this is a good basis for the audit committee to challenge management, but also to challenge the auditor in its work. The third instrument, and that's just for completeness, which I want to mention, is the intensified dialogue with the supervisory authorities, especially the financial market supervisors for banks and insurances. Now, what is the concrete role of audit committees in the future? The first two bullets I mentioned here is just for completeness. Audit committees are an essential part of corporate governance, of good corporate governance, and they're part of the supervisory structure of a company. So this is already basically set in, at least in Europe, for PIEs. What is important is that there will be an increased role to challenge the management on their assumptions and the whole financial reporting process as such. And the audit committee will monitor more closely the financial reporting process and will receive more information which they may deliver to the supervisory board, which is the central, at least in Germany, the central element of good corporate governance. Now, what can the auditor do to contribute to these new responsibilities? I think there are two basic lines. One is the instrument of the additional report, and the second one, there has to be more continuing communication between the auditor and the audit committee. Now, with these new tasks, the new audit committees will put probably more pressure also on the auditors to receive more information out of this auditing process. Now, they will have to invest, I think, more time and more energy in their relationship with the committee, and they have to be aware of new expectations which comes from the audit committees. It's not a one-way street. It's not that the auditors will give more information to the audit committees, but I think it's also going back. Auditors will be in a crucial position to answer questions from the audit committee. And that in itself, I think, will increase audit quality. Now, what are the new responsibilities for the audit committee to challenge management? This is a long list. I do not want to mention everything here, but if you look at the list, you will see that starting from the very high-level principle-based responsibility to inform the administrative and supervisory body of the outcome of the statutory audit, you will see that there are very detailed responsibilities and tasks for the audit committee, for example, with regard to the whole financial reporting process and the obligation to make recommendations to ensure its integrity. Well, that sounds very principle-based, but we will see in practice that there will be more to come out of this whole process. Now, at the end, I think the auditor, with regard to all these responsibilities which have been outlined in the first bullets, will provide and has to provide more information to the audit committee to make it possible that the audit committee challenges the management. Now, what is the connection to improve audit quality in all of this? I think, as I said, auditors will find themselves under increased scrutiny. If I may say this as a regulator, I think it will be, in fact, it will happen, about the whole financial reporting process. So it's not enough just to deliver the audit report. We have seen examples in Germany as well, and I think in also other countries as well. Audit committees become more active in their role. Now, with regard to improving audit quality, the EU reform introduces a couple of new requirements. I have highlighted 4 here on this slide. First of all, the committee has to monitor the quality of the statutory auditor and at the same time take into account any findings and conclusions by the relevant competent authorities, if I may add, if the member state of the European Union allows this. It's a tricky question of confidentiality and sanctions. I'm sure that there are a couple of people here who have a different opinion about sanctions and blame and shaming sanctions. But this is a responsibility laid down in the reform. The second one, and I come back to the first slide, is the question of the appropriateness of the provision of non-audit services. Now, the audit committee will be in a central role to decide about this appropriateness of non-audit services, because that has an influence on audit quality in itself. And the third one, which is important, is the Audit Committee will be the key factor for the selection of the statutory auditor and audit firm and recommend the statutory auditor or the audit firm with regard to tendering and the audit firm rotation. So it's a key role of the Audit Committee. So finally, as I said, the audit committees may challenge the statutory auditor much more often in future than before. I think they do it already now. We don't have bad corporate governance, but I think this is a highlight and a new framework which makes it obvious for everybody. Also on the side of the audited entities, there has to be more energy and more resources put into this new setting of committees. Now this is very hard to read, so I try to be brief. I've tried to put together different responsibilities, different topics. Although the regulatory role of the Audit Committee, as I said, is very different from national jurisdiction to the other, I think in general one may say that audit committees will have to rethink their role because they are much more often than before in the center of the audit and the financial reporting process. And auditors have to be aware of these key expectations. Now, I have put out here 5 key elements to strengthen audit quality. The first is audit committees have to challenge assumptions by management and by auditors. And they have to insist on continuing communication between the audit committee and the statutory auditor. If you look at the requirements of the additional report, you will find that the auditor has to say something on the level of communication it had with the management, but also with the audit committee. So it has to be obvious. So it's not a one-way street. The auditor has to bring information, but the audit committee will also ask questions. The third one is monitor audit fees. And if you look at the EU regulation, you'll find a lot of new requirements where the audit committee has to decide about not only about the appropriateness of non-audit services, but also on specific ceilings on audit fees. In specific cases, it has to be consulted, and the audit committee has to decide whether these non-audit services are still appropriate. And the last one is they play a central role in the review of the independence of the statutory auditor. So in sum, I think, and that's in the middle of this slide, in sum, I think audit committees and auditors have to invest more time and resources in the audit process. The statutory auditor will not only be responsible just for communicating the results of his work via the traditional instruments, but he will find himself challenged by the audit committee throughout the process of an audit. This is not an ongoing process every day, but there have to be crucial steps where the audit committee has to step in and probably ask further questions and ask for further information. Furthermore, new responsibilities of the Audit Committee for non-audit services and the selection process will bring the Audit Committee much closer to the big question how to ensure audit quality in a specific audited entity. That may lead to more pressure and on raising the bar for a good audit. Well, that's it. I stop here. I think I have only two minutes to come. Thank you very much for your attention, and happy to ask and answer questions later on. Thank you.